Hello there, and welcome back to the Film Score Podcast. This will probably be my shortest introduction ever, and that's because you already know today's guest, Viggo Mortensen. Now, what you might not know about Viggo is that, in addition to being a, obviously, celebrated, award-winning and nominated actor in some of the greatest films of all time, he's also a musician and film composer, composing the score for his latest directorial effort, The Dead Don't Hurt. So this is a quick interview, and it was frankly the most surreal interview I'd ever done. I was certain that I was having a practical joke played on me, and maybe I'll still wake up. The one thing I'll say is that Viggo was really adamant that I have the ability to use his music if I wanted, even offering to contact Sony and Milan Records. So I gotta say, great guy. Now, sit back and I hope you enjoy. Viggo, I'm so glad you could join me today. How have you been?
I've been good. A little tired. Been doing promotion of this movie for months now in different countries, but it helps when the audience reactions are good and people seem to generally find something of interest in the movie and then the soundtrack as well. So it's nice. A lot of people, regular audience members, have brought it up, and almost every Q&A session after every screening, somebody brings up the music and wonders about it, what went into it, and all that stuff. So that's a positive sign.
Do you find that people are surprised that you did the music for it?
Sometimes they seem to be, yeah. I'm not known as a composer. I mean, this is the third movie I've had some music in, including the first one I directed, which I did the score for. But it's something I've been involved in for years, music, but it's not something I'm known for. I'm known more as an actor and now as a director, I guess.
Well, that was something that it surprised me a little bit as well, just the depth of your music history. I was, growing up and still now as a big metalhead, big into metal, and so seeing that you worked with Buckethead starting in the mid to late 90s up through, at least on the score of your prior film Falling,
Right.
certainly surprised me. So it's obviously something you've been doing for 35-ish years, maybe longer.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you really get into music as an interest, as a passion?
I guess it started with, I always like to play the piano a little bit and sort of daydream, not thinking about any particular melody, but just thinking about what was going on in my life. Whenever I saw a piano, it's not like I had one in the house or anything, but when I was a kid at my grandmother's house, she had one, so I would just play, and it would be a nice, like daydreamy thing to do without putting much thought into it. Usually images, of things coming to me and just playing and imagining things. And then later on, when I started doing spoken word readings and stuff, I did that with some musicians sometimes. And before I met Buckethead even, yeah, it just seemed to go with the words, sometimes the music, it just made sense, or the imagery that the poems were trying to get across. And Buckethead I met, it was sort of by chance. There was a company that was making these educational videos for high school kids or something. And they were doing an album, I think it was Dub Audio or something. And it was called, the company. And this was in the 90s, and they asked me if I would write a piece. They were doing something in Greek mythology. And they said, "Oh, do something on Poseidon, the god of the sea." And I said, "Okay, what do you want?" And they said, "Well, just whatever you come up with in terms of text or something." So I had a piece I wrote that had to do with, in some way, water images and stuff. And then I crudely went and recorded some water sounds and just sort of did a crude mix of that and sent it to them. And I didn't think any more of it. And then sometime later, they sent me the finished product, which included the track I had contributed. It had been remixed and had this beautiful, haunting kind of guitar added to it. And I said, "Wow, that's beautiful. Who's that?" And when they said Buckethead, I didn't know who he was. And he was working with Bill Laswell at the time, I think in New York. But then I said, "Oh, I'd love to get a hold of him and maybe we could do something else. Where is he? is he in New York? And I said, no, he's moved back to California. And so I tracked him down and invited him to the studio where I've recorded pretty much everything. My friend Travis Dickerson's recording studio in Chatsworth, California. And Buckethead showed up with his mask and everything, and with a couple duffel bags full of Japanese toys that moved and made sounds, and then a bunch of guitars and pedals and all kinds of stuff. I was like, wow, I thought it would just be a guy showing up with a guitar, maybe two. And he said, I hope it's okay, I brought all this stuff. And I said, sure, let's have at it. And we made some strange sounds together, and we were just playing. And always working with him has been play, which is ideal, just fun, and there's a certain getting to know him. He has his attention span he's very focused, and we would get some stuff done, and it would last a certain amount of time, and then that would be it. And then we would just talk about other stuff. That would be our session, and we'd do that once in a while, and it was always fun, and we always got some interesting material out of it, and then I would mix it and see how it turned out. And it was just for fun, and we did that for a number of years. And Lisandro Alonso, an Argentine director, a movie called Jauja that I did, it's sort of a strange Argentine Western. It was like his fifth movie, but he'd never used music before. And he suddenly said to me when he was in post-production editing the movie, he said, I'd love to have a little bit of music in this, only in two places. And I said, uh-huh. And since I was one of his producers, I said, well, we don't have any money. I mean, I don't know what kind of music. He's saying, well, it doesn't have to be from the period, could be something different. I said, could it include electric guitar, piano, or could be, he goes, yeah, it could be anything. I don't know. I said, well, I have some stuff that I can work on and provide, and it won't cost us anything. So that's how we did the soundtrack work for him on that movie. And then the first movie I directed following, obviously, I took a long time, years before I could find the money to shoot it once I had the script and the actor. And in the meantime, I was just kind of restless. And as part of the process of writing, really, I started imagining what scenes, if any, would there be music in, and what kind of music would it be. And so gradually started putting that together and had a lot of it done before we shot the movie, which seems kind of backwards, but it worked for us. It helped me, it guided me as to the tone of certain scenes, the rhythm, certain scenes, and then during the shoot, and then in editing, it was also very helpful in that regard. It helped me with timing and the feeling that I wanted to get across. I like music that supports the story, that's part of the storytelling. It doesn't stand apart from it or try to instruct the audience what they should feel, whether they should be afraid or happy or moved or anything. It should help the storytelling, the writing, really.
So there's a number of things I'd want to grab onto that, but on that point, look, I know that you've probably been asked about Lord of the Rings 50,000 times over the last 20 years, so I swear this will be only tangentially related. But as an actor, you've worked in a number of films that have great composers, Howard Shore, Lord of the Rings, as well as on films like Eastern Promises.
That was fun. Actually, on Lord of the Rings, that was actually would have been my first foray in a way, because I had suggested to the director that in Aragorn's coronation scene, I said, in the book, he speaks these words, or it says he sings them, really. And it would be nice to do that. And they thought it was a good idea. And so I came up with that melody and put it to those words, and sang it, Bella, in the movie. So, and then they incorporated that. So that was sort of, I guess, my first foray, little mini foray in terms of composing. But go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no. What I was going to say is that as an actor, you've been in plenty of films with these great composers. You just mentioned you as a director and as a composer, like when the score is enriching the story. But as an actor, what's your reaction when you see your performance on screen with the final music added into it?
It depends on the movie, what kind of music should be. Obviously, what Howard Shore did for Lord of the Rings was like a big kind of sound, and it was quite different from what we do in The Dead Don't Hurt, for example, which is a little more austere, and it's not wall-to-wall music. It's just a different kind of approach. But I've also been in movies where Howard has done the score, and it's been different, whether it's History of Violence or Eastern Promises, Crimes of the Future. They're very different scores, and he's got a lot of range. I mean, he's able to do a lot of different things. Or let's say a score, there's a movie called Far From Men that Warren Ellis and Nick Cave did, and that's beautiful, and it's very it's more discreet, and it just sets a tone. And or The Road, John Hillcoat's movie from Cormac McCarthy's book, that was Warren and Nick also, and a beautiful score. So there's all kinds of ways, but generally speaking, in movies, I don't like it when the photography or the acting or the dialogue or the music are trying to manipulate the audience. It's just, as an audience member, just my particular taste, not just as an actor, but just as a moviegoer. I really don't like it when a movie is just nonstop music that's trying to guide you all the time, to tell you, oh, now you got to be sad, or this is going to be scary, or you should be joyful now, you should be rejoicing. I don't like that. I like, personally, as a director anyway, and then I guess as a composer, I respect the intelligence of the audience. I think they can figure out a lot more than most people give them credit for on their own, without any help from me. Just give people enough so that they can participate and be part of the storytelling in a way. And that includes the music. I think let the action, let the performances speak for themselves. And if you can complement, even going counter to what the tone seems to be, what the mood is visually, but if it's complementing, if it's adding a layer to the storytelling that seems organic and just moves it forward in the right way, that's great. But if it doesn't do that, then there shouldn't be any music, period. It should be minimal, Sometimes there's just a cue that for a transition or something, and we've done that in The Dead Don't Hurt too in a few places. But yeah, I think definitely less is more. I mean, all the music we composed for The Dead Don't Hurt well before shooting started. When I got into the editing room, I did with the music the same thing I did with the images. You have to be cold about it, even though you've written the music and you've written the script. If a scene isn't really moving the thing forward, no matter how good the scene is, it has to go. There was a couple of pieces of music that I really love. Maybe I'll use it some other place, some other time, I don't know, or put it out somehow, but that I really loved. But I thought in the end, you know what? This scene is better with no music, and we're just gonna lose it. It's like when you're writing a poem or rewriting a poem. The exercise for me has always been, how many words can I take out and still say the same thing? Same goes for music. Same goes for writing, for movies and acting.
That reminds me of, I think, was it Hemingway who had the quote of, he wrote someone a letter and said, I meant for this to be one page, but I only had time for two. The same sort of thing of putting material out there and then chiseling it away and cutting out. And I think that mindset, that viewpoint really informs the score in this film, because like you mentioned earlier, it's austere, it's really restrained. It comes in for 30 seconds and then you'll have 10 minutes of just the film itself.
But then there's a couple of transitions, which I knew would be important, where it's really fulsome and we really hear the cello and the violin, and it goes and it lasts through several transitions. So yeah, it has to be in the right place.
And so, being both the composer and the director, how do you get over that conflict of interest of where, like you mentioned, you have pieces in there that would have been in there that you loved and took out? How do you make that choice?
If you really, really love something and you decide it doesn't go where it should, then you can look at the rest of the score and say, well, maybe I can switch this out for one of the ones that are definitely the scenes where you need music. And in one case, I think I did that. I switched what I had originally thought would be for that scene, because in composing the music, I basically had the script next to me and I'm at the piano and I'm going scene by scene. Does this need anything? No, or yes. What would it be? And then I imagine it, put that down, and then move on to the next. So it's like writing, really. It's part of the writing. Some of those pieces, they just don't belong. They're not going to be part of this movie, but in some cases where a piece is truncated in the soundtrack that's just been released by Sony, by Milan Records, there are the full versions of some of those pieces that are, maybe it's 30, 40 seconds in the movie, and yet on the soundtrack it's 2.5 minutes or more, It just depends. And then obviously the final piece, which is the end credits piece, that revisits, variations, and different instrumentation, so cello and the violin take turns, and there's a certain version of the violin that's got this Appalachian sound, and it's variations on themes that you've heard in the movie as a way of going over and, what you've just seen, I guess, of what you may have felt about it. And people tend to stay, I've seen in these Q&As, they tend to stay throughout the credits and listen. And that's like I think it's like 7 minutes, 44 seconds. That's a long piece uninterrupted. And that's on the soundtrack record. But there's other pieces that are longer. Or let's say in the saloon, there's a musician. He really wasn't an actor, but ended up casting him because he was like the idea I had for this. I wanted an actor who could play the piano where I wouldn't have to do that trick where you see someone who can play their hands and then you see the actor. I didn't want to be free to be able to shoot him in any situation. And the idea of this character was he's someone who's not from there. He's from Spain or some other place. And he plays too well to be playing in that saloon on that piano that's slightly out of tune. Why is he there? Well, personal reasons, he fell in love with someone, he has a family, and he lives there, and they're lucky they have him playing in the saloon. That's the idea. So with this actor, musician, who's a friend of mine, and whom I've performed with before, doing poetry and music together publicly, he's really gifted, and he played really well. And the pieces that he plays where, let's say, there's lots of noise from people in the saloon, or when he gets beat up, where the song he starts to play is the only part of it. We recorded in that space in the saloon, and on the sound, you hear the difference. You'll hear the ambient sound. You can hear it's a completely different sound. It's live, but it's the full piece with nobody in there on that piano, which is not quite perfectly in tune. It's this old upright piano, and that's really nice. And there, instead of just having a little bit of it, with people yelling, screaming, talking in the background and drinking, here it's just him by himself, and you hear every creak of his stool and all that, and his breathing, and it's really immediate, but it's the whole piece, for example. So it's nice to be able to have that as well.
Yeah, and I saw, like you mentioned, he's credited on a number of tracks on the score release, Rafel Plana.
Yeah, he played the stuff that's, public domain. I found, I did some research what was being played in saloons at the time. He plays those pieces, the one where he's interrupted and beat up, and the one he starts to play after being beat up, and then a couple other pieces. And there's one original piece that's also on the soundtrack, but it's the whole thing, not just what you hear in the movie, which is there's the end of a scene where it's a way he's communicating to Vivienne in a way without looking at her, like saying, "I've got your back," and it's a very soothing, it's beautiful. And that was something he was inspired to say, "Hey, look, I came up with something practicing on the piano." And he played it for me, and I said, "That's really beautiful. And I know where we'll use that. We'll use it at the end of this scene. But make sure you record the whole thing on that piano cleanly, as cleanly as possible in that space. And we'll use that later on." And so on the soundtrack record, you've got the whole piece, and it's quite lovely. It's beautiful. And that's an original piece by him. But then he played the other, historical covers, basically.
Interesting.
He also helped me with, there's a cellist and a violinist that play at the restaurant live, and they're local musicians from Durango, Mexico. We did sort of a casting for a cellist, a violinist, and found the two that would sounded the best, at least to me. And as it turned out, they were husband and wife. Lucky. And so they're in the far background of the restaurant. They play there, and they also play, there's a Schubert piece and a Vivaldi piece, and they play also at the exhibition where the paintings, you can hear that sort of in the background. And Rafel helped me with that, prepping them and prepping that music, adapting it to just cello, violin.
And do you notice a difference in collaborating with musicians, whether it be on a standalone album release or on a film like this, where you're collaborating both on the score but also with live musicians in the film, compared to collaborating with actors or other folks that are behind the scenes?
No, I mean, it's a collaboration. That's the right word for it, ideally. And you have to be flexible. Every musician's different, The musicians that played live in the movie, these two Mexican musicians, husband and wife, I wanted them to play the best they possibly could, but it didn't have to be perfect.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because it wouldn't have been, they're in San Francisco in 1861 and they're pretty good, but it would have been weird if I went and got the best possible cellist violinist I could find anywhere in the world. Or if I'd gotten Cameron Stone and Scarlett Rivera to play that and then place it, I could have done that. But I wanted it to sound, even with slight, not perfect, I wanted it to be done in that space, by real musicians playing like they might have at the time, so it wouldn't be this artificially too good sounding, you know what I mean? No disrespect to them, I think they did it great, but we didn't give them the best kind of ambient sound, the best kind of space to play in, but it sounded the way it should, And then I just adapted to what they needed, maybe the cellist needed 2 takes for something, and we did record them clean, but in that space, like we did Rafel, and then with Cameron and Scarlett, they get along and they complement each other, and we recorded things separately with them after they'd learned the melodies, and then in a couple instances, I guess with Cameron, did a couple things where there was really limited editing that could be done. We played live together, and initially the way I came up with the stuff was on piano, but I didn't initially really want any piano in the movie. I didn't think at first, and then it was Cameron, and both Cameron and Scarlett said, no, it's really nice, and I think it complements, and then the more I started thinking about it, it ties in with the Claudio, that character, that there is some piano and it says something. So, I mean, I suppose the cello is the main instrument in the soundtrack, and the violin slightly less, but the piano is important there and it complements what they're doing. So it was just adapting and working to, everybody's different. And the same with actors. You have to be flexible. Every musician's different, every actor's different. And on every day, each different day, those people are different too, just they're human beings. So, you can have a really good day or a day where it takes you a little longer to get the thing right or feel comfortable. Even though when you're trying to record something or you're making a movie, there is a limited time. You don't have forever.
Right.
But the idea is to give the illusion, I suppose, as a director or as a composer, that there is all the time in the world, that there is no pressure. The best thing you can do is take the pressure off actors or musicians, I think, and off yourself. It's like we have a plan, we have to get our day, but the work done today that we need to get done. But it's almost like you have to sort of, some meditative way, trick yourself into imagining that there is no time limit. And then things seem to come more quickly anyway.
Well, I mean, and that's one of the beauties of film is what we're seeing, that the finished film is, it is an illusion. But it's a beautiful one that I love buying into.
That's cool.
But, Viggo, here we are at half an hour. I really appreciate your time. You joined me today. It was my pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for your time, man.